So I'm in the city of Numazu, Shizuoka Prefecture, and this is yet another episode of Ken Mogi's Street Brain Radio. In this episode, I think I will talk about my book, The Qualia and the Brain, which I wrote in Japanese in 1997, and which I am in the process of translating into English. This is, in my point of view, my opus magnum opus in a humble way, and I think if you add up everything else that I have written over the years, they wouldn't compare to the significance of Qualia and the Brain. So as far as I'm concerned, this is the book of my life, and in which I discussed the foundations of the neural correlates of consciousness, and in a unique way. It's something quite different from what's out there in general. It's different from integrated information theory, quantum consciousness, or free energy principle, all these things that try to explain consciousness. So there's a great chance that I am wrong, completely in the dark. But there's a slight possibility that I might have something up in the sleeves with this book, Qualia and the Brain. The fundamental question that I asked in this book is the validity of the concept of response selectivity. And this has been around for many years. And when I got my PhD from the physics department of the University of Tokyo, I went on to study at the Riken Institute, where they were founding a new brain research institute headed by Professor Masao Ito. That's where I started my career, and for some time I didn't really know what to do with cognitive science or neuroscience, because it seems too complex. And then about almost a year after I joined the Brain Science Institute in Riken, I hit upon the idea that, we hit upon the realization that everything we perceive is made of Qualia. I mean, this was a fundamental discovery on my part. Of course, it's not something new, but I was not aware of the fact then, and it completely changed my worldview. But anyway, so I went on to consider the foundations of consciousness of Qualia, and I realized that the selective response selectivity, which was kind of a central dogma in neuroscience at that time, it is still, was probably flawed as a foundation for explaining consciousness. For example, if you measure the activities of neurons in the area V4 in the brain, you would find neurons that are selectively responsive to some color, like red, and satisfying the color constancy requirement. And then you would proclaim that you have found the mechanism for the perception of the color red. So many people actually equate the activities of neurons selectively responsive to a certain visual feature, like color, with the conscious perception of that feature. So response selectivity equals Qualia. That is a mantra that many neuroscientists were putting forward at the time, and still they are doing that. And of course, this is a simple idea, and it must be modified. For example, you can replace a single neuron with a spatial-temporal pattern of neural activities, and if you find a certain pattern of neurons, neural activities that selectively respond to a certain visual feature, then you would proclaim that you have found the mechanism for the conscious perception of that visual feature. So this is a fundamental assumption behind the response selectivity as applied to the foundation of consciousness. So in my book, Qualia and the Brain, I argued, and I think I demonstrated without a fact, logical brute force or any reasonable doubt that this can't be held as the principle for conscious perception. It is a very simple argument, and it amazes me why and how people don't realize it to this day. Recently, I was having a discussion with a very respected scientist, and he mentioned that this idea of selective response selectivity, and he seems to believe that explained how we perceive something consciously, and which is totally wrong. So, I think this one simple point should be made more public, in the world. And, I wrote about these ideas in the book chapter. So it's there. You can look it up in my website. You can also download PDF. But, in the book Qualia and the Brain, I gave this argument a more full coverage. So it will be a great idea to put it up on the web and in the form of open access book. Anyway, so that is my criticism of response selectivity. In Qualia and the Brain, then I went on to discuss my fundamental starting point, which was Mach's principle in perception. Ernst Mach was the philosopher who influenced Albert Einstein pretty much, and he said that basically a property of an individual is not determined by its nature alone, but it's actually determined by the relationships between all the different elements in the universe with that element in question. So that was Mach's principle in perception. So this is a very simple idea. For example, the mass of a particle is not uniquely determined by its property alone, but it will be determined by its relationships with other particles in the universe. So it's simple as that. And this idea, Mach's principle, helped Albert Einstein develop his theory of relativity about space and time. Because, in Newtonian dynamics, space and time are frameworks which exist in the first place, and everything moves within this framework. But in Einstein's space-time, time and space, these are entities that are formed through the relative relations between things in the universe, and it's a totally different approach from the Newtonian dynamics. Anyway, and that's how. By the way, I am crossing a bridge in Numazu, and it's very beautiful. It seems a bit foolish to talk about consciousness when I am viewing something really beautiful. There's a range of mountains called Numazu Alps, and it's series of mountains, not so high, but really nice to see. And I'm looking at the Numazu Alps mountains right now from the bridge, and there's a river, a really beautiful river. I don't know the name of the river. It seems that it's called Karinogawa, I think. Anyway, yeah, it's called Karinogawa, I think. Anyway, look it up in the map and you can probably find it. Anyway, so yeah, where was I? Yeah, Mach's principle. So that can be applied to how consciousness arises from neural activities in the brain too. When you have a neuron, that neuron would be indistinguishable from other neurons in the brain. I mean, there are certain regional variations in the form and functions of the neurons, but basically they are the same. So, when you have a neuron firing in area V4, for example, the conventional idea would be to assume that because it is selectively responsive to a color red, the activity of it would invoke the qualia of color red in consciousness. However, according to the Mach's principle in perception, which is Mach's principle applied to the question of conscious perception, if a neuron, the activity of a neuron, has a certain role in conscious perception, it would be because of its relationships with other neurons in the brain. And that would give its special function as invoking the qualia of color red, and not because it's selectively responsive to the color red. So this is a very fundamentally different approach to how neurons cause conscious perception. Basically, response selectivity is a statistical idea. So it's based on the idea of statistical ensemble. In order to establish that a particular neural activity is selective to color red, you need to have a statistical ensemble of neural activities and make a statistical inference about it. And that is actually how electrophysiology and many neuroimaging experiments are actually conducted. Applying statistical analysis to neural activities and brain activities and so on. But that statistical approach is certainly useful when you analyze the functions of the brain, especially based on big data. But unfortunately, you cannot ascertain operationally the selectivity of a particular neural activity or pattern of neural activities based on the data or the state of affairs at a certain point in space and time. And the nature of conscious perception is that it is based on the activities of neurons at here and now. I mean, it's nothing else. I mean, when you have the perception of color red, you don't actually refer back to all the ensemble of stimuli that have gone through your brain. You are having the percept of color red, conscious percept of color red, based on the activities of neurons at the here and now. So you cannot actually apply statistical reasonings for that. So this is a fundamentally different approach to conscious perception, the foundations of conscious perception. And I believe this is the right way. And then the interesting question is how you can define the here, the spacious moment. How do you define the present moment in your conscious perception? Now this is an interesting question, which is something I am still pursuing. So anyway, that's just a tiny part of what I argued in my book, Qualia and the Brain, which I am translated into English. Hopefully I am finishing the job soon. But maybe I will talk about Qualia and the Brain and my arguments in it from time to time in my Street Brain Radio. But I have now reached the place where I am going to give a public lecture today in Numazu, so I need to stop recording this Street Brain Radio. So I hope to see you soon. Keep it up, and whatever you do, and I'll keep up my humble endeavors to understand our condition. Thank you.